go. Okay. Still on chapter 22, the sea still rises, and I'm now on page 215 at the very bottom. And we're all after this Fulan guy that apparently was not very nice to them, and they want blood, these people of Saint Antoine. "See!" cried Madame, pointing with her knife. "See the old villain Fulan bound with ropes. That was well done to tie a bunch of grass upon his back. Ha! Ha! That was well done. Let him eat it now." Madame put her knife under her armpit and clapped her hands, as at play. The people immediately behind Madame Defarge, explaining the cause of her satisfaction to those behind them, and those again explaining to others, and those to others, the neighbouring streets resounded with the clapping of hands. Similarly, during 2 or 3 hours of drawl, and the winnowing of many bushels of words, Madame Defarge's frequent expressions of impatience were taken up with marvellous quickness at a distance, the more rapidly because certain men who had, by some wonderful exercise of agility, climbed up the external architecture to look in from the windows, knew Madame Defarge well, and acted as a telegraph between her and the crowd outside the building. At length the sun rose so high that it struck a kindly ray, as of hope or protection, directly down upon the old prisoner's head. The favour was too much to bear. In an instant the barrier of dust and chaff that had stood surprisingly long went to the winds, and Saint Antoine had got him. It was known directly in the furthest confines of the crowd. Defarge had but sprung over a railing and a table, folded the miserable wretch in a deadly embrace. Madame Defarge had but followed, and turned her hand in one of the ropes with which he was tied. The Vengeance and Jacques Three were not yet up with them, and the men at the windows had not yet swooped into the hall, like birds of prey, from their high perches, when the cry seemed to go up all over the city, "Bring him out! Bring him to the lamp!" Down and up, and head foremost on the steps of the building, now on his knees, now on his feet, now on his back, dragged and struck at and stifled by the bunches of grass and straw that were thrust into his face by hundreds of hands, torn, bruised, panting, bleeding, yet always entreating and beseeching for mercy, now full of vehement agony of action, with a small clear space about him, as the people drew one another back, that they might see now a log of dead wood drawn through the forest of legs. He was hauled to the nearest street corner, where one of the fatal lamps swung, and there Madame Defarge let him go, as a cat might have done to a mouse, and silently and composedly looked at him while they made ready, and while he besought her, the women passionately screeching at him all the time, and the men sternly calling out to him to have him killed, the grass in his mouth. Once he went aloft, and the rope broke, and they caught him shrieking. Twice he went aloft, and the rope broke, and they caught him shrieking. Then the rope was merciful, and held him, and his head was soon upon a pike, with grass enough in his mouth for all Saint Antoine to dance at the sight of. Now, was this the end of a day's bad work? For Saint Antoine so shouted and danced his angry blood up, that it boiled again on hearing, when the day closed in, that the son-in-law of the dispatched, another of the people's enemies and insulters, was coming into Paris under a guard 500 strong, in cavalry alone. Saint Antoine wrote his crimes on flaring sheets of paper, and seized him, would have torn him out of the breast of an army to bear Fulan company, set his head and heart on pikes, and carried the 3 spoils of the day in wolf procession through the streets. Not before dark did the men and women come back to the children, wailing and breathless. Then the miserable bakers' shops were beset by long files of them, patiently waiting to buy bad bread. And while they waited with stomachs faint and empty, they beguiled the time by embracing one another on the triumphs of the day, and achieving them again in gossip. Gradually these strings of ragged people shortened and frayed away, and then poor lights began to shine in high windows, and slender fires were made in the streets, at which neighbors cooked in common, afterwards supping at their doors. Scanty and insufficient suppers those, and innocent of meat as of most other sauce to wretched bread. Yet human fellowship infused some nourishment into the flinty viands, and struck some sparks of cheerfulness out of them. Fathers and mothers, who had had their full share in the worst of the day, played gently with their meager children, and lovers, with such a world around them and before them, loved and hoped. It was almost morning when Defarge's wine shop parted with its last knot of customers, and Monsieur Defarge said to Madame, his wife, in husky tones, while fastening the door, "At last it has come, my dear." Well," returned Madame, "almost." Saint Antoine slept. The Defarges slept. Even the Vengeance slept with her starved grocer, and the drum was at rest. The drum's was the only voice in Saint Antoine that blood and hurry had not changed. The Vengeance, as custodian of the drum, could have wakened him up and had the same speech out of him as before the Bastille fell, or old Foulon was seized. Not so with the hoarse tones of the men and women in Saint Antoine's bosom. Okay, that concludes The Sea Still Rises, and you have some questions, and go ahead and answer those, please.